among other things, I'm editor now of the International Journal of Maritime Crime and Security. Some of what I'm going to talk about has featured in the last editorial in the last issue, and if you want to read more about it, you can find it on. So there's the link there. So World War III, in my view, has started. As I say, some people will disagree, but I have my views. World wars, of course, don't start as world wars. They start as local conflicts, which merge into what become great wars. For example, the First World War started as the Third Balkan War, when a Serb nationalist shot an Austrian archduke in the capital of Bosnia-Herzegovina. As a result, the Austro-Hungarian Empire issued an ultimatum to Serbia, and Serbs did not comply, and so Austria-Hungary attacked Serbia. The Russians then sided with their Slav brothers, the Serbs, and the Germans then backed Austria-Hungary, but because they had a plan to knock out France first before Russia could mobilize, which actually the Russians did very well and were much quicker than expected. So the Germans attacked France. They had a cunning plan. You've all heard that phrase before, I think, to go through Belgium to avoid the main French forces. So the British then came in to protect brave little Belgium, and the rest, as they say, is history. Turkey joined in 1915. It remained a largely European war until 1917, when America came in, partly as a result of unrestricted submarine warfare by the Germans, and so that's how the Russian Empire, the German Empire broke up, the Ottoman Empire broke up, and as a result of that, we have all the problems we still see in the Middle East today, largely due to two gentlemen, Sykes and Picot, Britain, a Frenchman, who in 1916 came up with a plan to split up the Ottoman Empire. So the French got Syria and Lebanon, and we got Palestine and Iraq, and so on. These wars have several characteristics which makes them world war. First of all, obviously, they were of a global scope, and interestingly, it normally starts the first big engagements are at sea. So in 1914, we had Coronel and the Falkland Islands. In 1939, we had the Battle of the River Plate, because the Gruff Spey, the pocket battleship, was commerce raiding and sinking merchant ships carrying goods from the British Empire largely to Britain, and so on. Secondly, I must say that it must involve a world war as conventionally defined, and there's literature on this which you can read up. It involves a major war in Europe, and so the Cold War, which was arguably in other senses a world war, didn't involve an actual shooting war in Europe. So that's why it was called the Cold War. However, it was pretty hot if you were in the Middle East, 1967, 1973, 1982, so on. And it was pretty hot if you were in Vietnam, all of which were surrogate wars for the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States and NATO. So world wars involve many component conflicts, and also they usually involve new or greatly evolved, at least, technology. So in the First World War, we had airships and aeroplanes and submarines and poison gas, of course, and also the involvement of civilian populations in the war. We had Zeppelin bombing London. Indeed, my grandmother went to Hampstead Heath, I think it was, to see one, a Zeppelin, which had been shot down. When they brought out the bodies of the German crewmen, everybody cheered. And her mother said, well, they've all got mothers. They've all got mothers. So that's a bit of personal account from my own family. These many wars are brought together by what Thomas Jefferson, third president of the United States, called entangling alliances. And that is in his 1801 inaugural address. He said that America wanted peace, commerce, and honest friendship with all nations, entangling alliances with none. And this was actually a good basis for current American foreign policy, where they don't want permanent alliances, they want, as appropriate, temporary alliances. So I think Donald Trump probably agrees with Thomas Jefferson. That quote is often attributed to George Washington, but it wasn't, it was Thomas Jefferson. Moving forward, we get to the end of the 19th century and the run-up to the First World War. And a very important guy writing about this was Ivan Bloch, a Warsaw banker. Poland was, of course, part of the Russian Empire in those days. And he wrote a book originally published in Russian, but then translated in 1898, and then translated in 1899 into French and German. And the French version, as you can see from this English translation, was obviously easier to read for most people. And then it was translated into English in the following year, 1899. The original was 6 volumes. It's massive. And it's got a lot of technical content, actually. It was translated, the conclusions were translated into English, volume 6, as "Is War Now Impossible?" And that's not actually what Bloch said. So therefore that translation, like many translations, is misleading. Future of War and its Technical, Economic and Political Relations was the original title of the full 6 volumes. This was picked up by a lot of people, including the vicious the nice guy, his satire was vicious, H.H. Munro, known as Saki. And in the Westminster Alice, which is a satirical take on the Westminster Village, as we now call it, Alice meets the White Knight, who was the Marquis of Lansdowne, the Secretary of State for War from 1895 to 1900. He's a very distinguished chap, Lansdowne. He'd been Governor of Canada and Viceroy of India and all kinds of good, nice work if you can get it. Lansdowne says, you see, I had read a book written by someone to prove that warfare under modern conditions was impossible. Well, that's not actually what Bloch said, but and you can see on his War Office horse, he's got Bloch's Is War Now Impossible, the English translation, and we've got Creasy's 15 Decisive Battles, which is obviously the GCSE in future warfare. Yes, sorry.
You've got 2 minutes.
Oh. Okay, so you can imagine how disturbing this was to a man in my profession. And Alice says, you went to war, of course. And Lansdowne says, yes, but not under modern conditions. So good stuff. The other person I must mention in the context we're discussing the global economy, of course, is Norman Angell, who won the Nobel Prize actually for a paper called Europe's Optical Illusion, which became the Great Illusion. And because in the modern world, globalization and all that nowadays, of course, he said that there was no economic benefit to anybody going to war. And he was probably right, but it didn't stop them doing that anyway. So he, of course, after the First World War, he was widely ridiculed. So to summarize my argument, if we look at, we also had the 7 Years' War and the French Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars, which had embraced the whole globe because we had huge colonial empires. So we had people like Robert Clive in India and James Wolfe in Canada fighting the French. And today, the same with the French Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars. Again, it starts off as a European conflict, but it extends across these various colonial empires. I haven't got time to go through all these aspects in detail, but clearly entangling alliances were involved, particularly involved, of course, in the First World War, because we had the Triple Entente and the Triple Alliance and so on. And so when Austria came in, Germany came in, and so on. New technology, aircraft, submarines, chemical warfare, and the involvement of all society. Second World War, much the same, entangling alliances begun with the Polish guarantee, but rapidly extended. There was that European cabinet war extended to North Africa, where there was a war between essentially the British and the Italians for control of the Mediterranean. Then, of course, we had the invasion of the Soviet Union. As a result of the casualties they suffered there, the Germans decided to take it out on ethnic minorities in Europe to even the balance. And then Japan attacked the United States, Pearl Harbor. Actually, the Pacific War began before the European War, the invasion of Manchuria in 1931 and mainland China in 1934. And it really went on until the end of the Chinese Civil War in 1949, as a result of which the nationalists retreated to Taiwan. And we've got the beginnings of a part of the Third World War there. And the Third World War, again, informal alliance now, and it was announced in February that Russia and China were going to have a serious friendship. Last week we had word that North Korea had opened a holiday resort, so on the Pacific coast near Kamchatka, which is, if you want to feel the earth move, I'll go there. Anyway, So, and that resort's actually going to be frequented largely by Russian tourists because, of course, they can't go to the Black Sea anymore because they're liable to get bombed by Ukraine. So, I think we have all the elements of a world war now in operation. And new technology, well, drones, unmanned air vehicles, remotely operated vehicles, cyber war, which is the development of electronic warfare, which we had since the French actually set up a jamming station on top of the Eiffel Tower in 1914. So I think we have all the ingredients, I'm afraid to say, of a world war. I hope I am wrong. Time for
take a couple.
I have
Yes.
yes, sir.
So my first question: why has Europe been involved in major wars throughout the modern history, and why does it seem that lessons from the past are not fully learned? Could external influences such as provocation or strategic interest from the United States plays a role in this pattern?
Well, if I can go back just to Angel's argument that war, nobody gets economic benefit from war. Well, the United States, of course, became a superpower because of its role in the Second World War, in large measure. There's an old saying, those who do not read history are doomed to replace it. I wouldn't accuse Mr. Trump of being of that number, but I was quite interested to hear him say that the person who starts the war is, of course, the defender. So Ukraine started the war because the Russians would have loved to have just walked in and done it without fighting. But actually, do you know who else said that? It was actually Karl von Clausewitz. There is a passage in Clausewitz on War where he says that it's the defender who starts the war because the attacker would just like to walk in and have a cup of tea. One more?
Yes. Any more questions?
Yeah. So my question is, so between 1989 when the Berlin Wall came down, the Warsaw Pact, and then from 1990 to, let's say, 2008, we were living in a unipolar war where the US could do anything they want. Currently, we are in a multipolar war, and I think the military-industrial complex, especially in the US and Europe, like colleague said, have not learned yet. The war have changed, it's different. Most countries have moved on, have equipped themselves. So my real question is, has the industrial military complex learned anything from history?
Right, well, I think you've largely answered your own question. Yes, the military-industrial complex has left a huge amount for history. Most of the equipment has been used in Ukraine, between Ukraine and Russia, was product of the Cold War. But a lot of that equipment is now out of date, and people are developing weaponry which is suitable for very different types of conflict, and the cyber element is hugely important. Yes.